Yeah.
I think there's definitely a connection between the body and the mind as well. You know, if you can do something that's physical and that gets you in a different mindset, it can completely change the way your mind is working. And you know, I can be with my Parkinson's, I can be quite anxious and often, and sort of, you know, as I am at the moment, I'm quite immobile from the shoulders up, but the hands are going like mad things now. But if I get involved in an interesting conversation or something I really care about, that can kick me back into the completely other end of the spectrum where I'm really relaxed and loose and enjoying myself. So I do think there is something about that changing the mindset to reboot and take the focus away from it, because if you can get into that positive space, it will help with the anxiety, I find.
Are you saying that Dave and I need to be a bit more interesting right now then, David?
No, not at all. No, I was thinking that as I said it. I thought, no, I know what they're going to say next, but sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But you know, I think it's changing that cadence and changing the rhythm of your circumstances can be quite important. And I agree, it's not just a case of sitting there and zoning out in front of the television. I think it has to be something active, you know, even active reading or something like that is better than just zoning out, because I think if you zone out, you're actually letting stuff back in again.
Yeah. I mean, I've just recently joined a young person's mentoring program for mental health, and you know, that it consistently, when I speak to the young people and ask them questions like, well, you know, they're all anxious about something, whether it's going out or whether they're anxious about school or they're anxious about underachieving, all sorts of things. But consistently, when I say to them, well, where's your comfortable place? Where's your comfort zone? Where do you feel happiest? The so-called happy place? Then they consistently come up with things like baking or painting or singing or drawing. And they're all things that occupy your mind, and they actually recognize that. They say, well, when I'm baking, my mind is completely in the recipe and in the doing of it. And for a period of time, I just forget about these anxieties. And
I think something there's also the link in there is something that's creative as well.
Yeah,
I'm thinking perhaps, you know, for some people in their life who don't have that opportunity to be creative, and I think when you're a child, you have that all the time. All your play is really creative and opportunity to do that, and we perhaps lose that a little bit as we get older. And so it's a real joy to be able to find those things that you enjoy and find those back. And that's
I think the happy place thing is a really interesting point, you know, about trying to find where your happy place was. And as you said that, I was thinking to myself, you know, where have I experienced that? And before I was diagnosed and before my symptoms got quite bad, I used to be a fencing coach. And actually sometimes just being in the fencing hall, watching some of my students fence, you know, I'd sit there and I think, yeah, all is well with the world, you know, this is where I'm supposed to be. And that was a really great sense of contentment, just doing that. Now, ironically, I find it when I'm in front of an audience and the presentation's going really well, which is kind of counterintuitive when you think, you know, I'm someone who could suffer potentially from anxiety attacks. I can get up on stage and talk in front of 100 people and really enjoy it. But I think finding that happy place is a really important thing for people to consider if they're suffering from anxiety and that kind of thing. Yeah,
and one of the case studies I came across recently, which really surprised me, despite kind of all the research I'd done on it, was Paul Weller from the Jam and Style Council, and he was being interviewed, and they said, you know, do you get worried about going on stage? And he said, yeah, I do. They said, what? When? You know, he said, every time. They said, what do you mean every time? You've been in the business over 30 odd years. How can you get nervous about going on? He said, well, as it builds up and it gets closer to the day and it gets within kind of an hour or two of the gig, he said, I want to be anywhere else but there. He said, I just want it to go away. I want it to be cancelled. And when he gets onto the, when he gets onto the stage and they said, well, are you nervous all through the performance? He said, no. He said, once I get into the first song, he said, there's nowhere else on earth I want to be than doing that concert for that audience. He said, it's, you know, the best place to be ever. And they said, well, you know, what are you nervous about? And he said, well, nervous, I'll forget the music, or I'll forget the words, or I'll just fluff it up. And she said, hang on a minute, you're one of the best songwriters of your time. They're your words, it's your music. How on earth could you forget the words or the music? He said, well, it's irrational. He said, but that's what I think. Well, why doesn't it get better? He said, no, it never leaves me. It never leaves me. It's always been like this. And I thought that's amazing, because, we often look at celebrities and their kind of Instagram self and their social media self and their television self. And you just, up until recently, not many of them did actually talk about having anxiety, but I think it's helped the fact that more of them have spoken about it. And, they're just like me and you. And I'm sure a lot of them have panic attacks as well.
One of the best conference speakers I've seen, I know personally as well, they are physically ill sometimes before they go on to talk, but they are just word perfect every time. And there's almost like a payoff between it. But I think it's one of those things that we would be surprised about how many people suffer, well, I never like using the word suffer. People say, you suffer with Parkinson's. I cohabit with these things. I don't suffer them. They're just part of me. And I find that embracing them into saying, this isn't necessarily a flaw or anything. This is just part of me, has certainly helped. So, I think you just embrace it as who you are, and be not proud of it. But I think once you can acknowledge it, it becomes a strength more than a weakness.
Yeah, I think you're right in terms of more people talking about it. Definitely just helps the next person talking. I think when I made a conscious decision to be open about my mental health and to talk about it, and clearly that's a personal decision, and it's not something that I would like push anyone else to do if they weren't comfortable doing that. But for me it helped me. I know it's helped other people, because I do get quite regularly people contact me either directly or, would you have a chat with my friend who I'm concerned about, but because I know that you'll understand and go through that. And quite often what people, when I've spoken at some public events about my lived experience of mental health issues, and people say, oh, really brave. And well, maybe yes. My point is, I don't think you should have to feel brave to talk about this. I think there is people that takes some bravery to do that. But I think the more that I talk about it, the more that other people talk about, the less brave the next person has to be to talk about it. And that's that first talk, as we said earlier, is that first step to recovery. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's also interesting when we talked about the things that naturally take your mind off it and make you feel better, the baking, the dancing, the drawing, the performing in front of an audience, because I think that's probably the psychologists would say that what you've done in that moment is kind of rediscovered a sense of purpose, whether it's baking a cake, whether it's doing a dance, whether it's doing a drawing. And I know that sense of purpose is something that we three have talked about before, and it probably merits a topic of its own. So maybe when we get together again, we could talk about that as a kind of why we all need a sense of purpose.
Sounds like a plan.
Yeah. But that's been great. And thank you, Mark, in particular, for being so open and being the catalyst for this conversation. I certainly reconnected with you once I read your post on LinkedIn about mental health, and once you've been really open and honest about it. And I thought, crikey, it must have taken a lot to do that. And, just in practical terms, I just felt I'll reach out to Mark and see if he's okay. Yeah. And that was about 6 months ago, and here we are still talking. So
yeah, really
good really comes out of this. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Cheers.